Albert Breer of the MMQB, senior writer of the MLQB, here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you doing, Albert?
I'm good. How you doing, Rich?
I'm doing fine. What do you think the top story is right now? As you and I are talking, not even first blush, 24 hours into the new league year. What's going on? Draft everything. I just give you that sort of macro question to start us off here.
I think probably the biggest impact transaction of the last week, and this is moving Kyler Murray aside for right now, would be Antonio Brown. And that's just because of who the Raiders are getting as a player. I think it's also about who the Steelers are as an organization and what's happened over the last 2 years there. And, what I mean by that, Rich, is that forever and ever, they've been a very player-friendly place. And they've been able to absorb big personalities. And that's why they've always had these battleship commander-type head coaches, from Chuck Noll to Bill Cowher to Mike Tomlin. And this is really the first time that it's blown up on them. They've always been able to sort of cast a wider net to go bring talent in because they've been able to handle big personalities. And they've got a lot of big personalities within their walls because of that. And, I think just when you want to look at this from a macro perspective, what does this mean for the Steelers? Because I don't know that we've ever seen the way they do things, the way they've always been able to handle big personality players, like all of that. We've never seen this boil over on them that way. And so, of course, Antonio Brown going to the Raiders is a big deal. He's a great player. But I think that there's a bigger story here that's sort of bubbling under the surface. It's going to be interesting to watch going forward.
Well, I think it's also league-wide. If another player is going to utilize social media to create a situation that even the team agrees is not something that could be put back together again or back in the bottle. And, everybody seems to think, well, you need to have a 9-year Hall of Fame resume to pull that off, not only get out, but get to a team where you want to go and then get the contract you want. I mean, that triple play is something we've never seen before. And I'm wondering, because, again, we can fill the void with whatever we want to fill it until we get an actual answer, and we may never get it, that might have played into the Giants' thinking with Odell Beckham,
no question.
I
mean, I look at it, Rich, all right, so we know the way all these contracts work, right? You get a 4 or 5 year contract, and really only the first 2 years are guaranteed. And after that, you kind of go into this situation where it's year to year as a team option. And we've seen players sort of start to chase at what they're making when they get out of the guaranteed money. And that's exactly where Antonio Brown was. This was the turn, 18 and 19, when the contract became non-guaranteed. And, I think in the past we've always had situations where players could say, well, I want a raise or give me a bump or move money around. I don't know, that this lever has ever been used where it's instead of going to your own team looking for a deal, raise hell, demand a trade, and then, for the trade to go through, say you need to have a new contract. You wonder if there's going to be a new lever for players where players say, if I can't get more where I'm at, and I'm out of my guaranteed money, well, then I need to get to a new team that's going to be excited to have me and that's going to pay guaranteed money to get me. And so I think that there are a number of players that we can watch along those lines over the next few years when they get out of the guaranteed money. And the one I'm sort of just keeping an eye on right now would be Julio Jones in Atlanta, who got a renegotiation last year with 3 years left on his deal. He's got 2 years left on his contract. He's out of the guarantees. And the Falcons promised that they'd redo his deal this offseason. If that's not to his satisfaction, could he ask for a trade out of Atlanta? It creates an interesting new lever that really hasn't been there for players in the past.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. So then why was Odell traded? Why was the code red ordered? So that's the question right now, especially since Albert, let me just keep trying to set it up here to get it all out. I mean, they re-signed him last year, and Gettleman did say at the Combine in a reasonable statement, one would think, we didn't re-sign him to trade him. So clearly they thought whatever they discussed with Pat Shurmur between player and coach, new coach and ownership, they clearly thought that change would bring about a change. And then something clearly happened in the last 16-game regular season schedule or before it or after it that caused the Giants to say, we're done here. So what happened?
I think organizationally they took a hard left turn in the middle of the season. And it was subtle, and it sort of flew a little under the radar. But if you want to go back to the October meetings, and the Giants were really struggling, and John Mara said publicly, we need to take a hard look at this, and we may not be doing it overnight. And I think what has been the case in New York for the last 5-6 years, that roster was broken. And they were able in 2016 to Band-Aid it, and they go out and they sign Olivier Vernon and Janoris Jenkins and Snacks Harrison, and then they make the playoffs in a season when everything went right? And then the 2 off seasons after that, they were chasing that success. Like, they felt like they were a lot closer than they actually were. And I think in the middle of last season, what happened organizationally was the people in that building came to the realization we're not as close as we think we are. We cannot be operating like a win-now organization because that's not where we are. And I think that they were late on that. They certainly should have realized that earlier, but I do think in the middle of the season they came to that realization that they need a full-on rebuild. And so I don't think we can relate anything they do now to anything that they did before October or November. And I think now they're going through a full rebuild, and the question becomes, is it worth having a great player, but a guy who's a wide receiver who can be a pain in the ass around when you're looking to rebuild? You may be bringing a young quarterback in. You're going to be trying to fill your building with talented young guys. Or do you go and flip him for some capital so you've got a little bit more to rebuild your team with? And so I know a lot of people are trying to juxtapose this against the moves the Giants made the last 2 off seasons. I don't think you can do that because my feeling on it is there was an understanding that was arrived at in the middle of the season, and they're now, as a result of that, going into a full rebuild.
So then if you're in a full rebuild, then you can't start your 2-time Super Bowl winning franchise face, future Hall of Famer, certainly ring Hall of Famer locally. We can have an argument about Eli in the actual Hall. That makes no sense then. I mean, so the court, you even mentioned bringing a young quarterback, and I assume it's going to be Dwayne Haskins from your alma mater, or it could be a surprise in Kyler Murray. We could hit that in a second. But the question for me is, what did the Eli's going to get a bonus just for being on the team on Saturday? This is it. They've got to make this whole thing now, don't they?
I think you have to look at it though. Like, you have to look at Eli Manning now as a bridge quarterback. I know that sounds weird because of all the history he has there. And, it's tough. It's a tough thing to look at a guy like that who's got that many pelts in the wall as a bridge quarterback. But right now, that's how you have to look at him. He's a bridge to the next guy. He's making $17 million this year. That's only $1 million more than Tyrod Taylor made as the bridge guy in Cleveland last year. So you're already paying about what the going rate for a bridge quarterback is, and you know what you're getting. Instead of going out and spending on Ryan Tannehill or someone like that, or Nick Foles, you've got someone in the building who you understand what he's about, and you hope that playing him, having him in the building, will get you to the next guy, whether it's this year or next. I mean, that's the best way I can explain it, Rich. It's just, I think that the Dolphins have sort of struggled with this a little bit with Tannehill too. It's like, can you turn a guy who was your franchise quarterback into the bridge quarterback because it logistically makes more sense than going and doing what Cleveland did last year and spending $16 million on Tyrod, or what Arizona did and going and spending $20 million on Sam Bradford.
A few more minutes left here with Albert Breer. So then comes the Kyler Murray drafted first overall. Do you believe that's the case right now?
I don't think that decision's been arrived at, but I would guess right now that Arizona will take him number 1. I think if you're Mike Bidwell or Steve Keim, you have to be 100% behind Cliff Kingsbury. You took an enormous swing in hiring a guy who just got fired out of the Big 12, and I think he's a good quarterbacks guy and a good offensive coach. But no matter how you slice that, it's a big swing. And if you're going to take a big swing, then you have to be behind the guy. And if the guy comes to you and says, this Kyler Murray, this is a guy who can make my offense fly, you have to listen to him. And I think if that hasn't happened already, at some point it will, just based on what I know about relationships there in the Big 12. I talked to Lincoln Riley about this a couple of weeks ago. He played with Cliff Kingsbury at Texas Tech. They're from the same offensive family. He coached against Kingsbury the last 4 years in the Big 12. And Lincoln Riley told me that Kyler Murray is an absolutely perfect fit from a personality standpoint, scheme standpoint, everything for Cliff Kingsbury. And so I can't tell you that I know that Cliff Kingsbury loves Kyler Murray and wants Kyler Murray to run the offense. But right now, based on what I do know, I can tell you that I do think that that's the case. And that makes, in my mind, Kyler Murray the favorite to be the first overall pick.
Well, if that happens, then don't you think they need to trade Rosen sooner rather than later because they have a better market for him if they do it on the QT as opposed to drafting the guy and everybody knows they've got to get rid of Josh Rosen and then suddenly they don't get the market value for him? So walk me through how that all plays out. Who would be in the market for Rosen? And would the Giants be one of those teams to bring this whole thing full circle?
It's tricky because it's definitely tricky, because it's like the minute you put Rosen on the market, you're telling everybody going with the first pick. You know what I mean? So, you have to be sure of what you're going to do because then, all right, now we've kind of declared what our intentions are. I think the market for Rosen could be really interesting for teams that are looking for the next guy. Now, you mentioned the Giants, Miami. There are some obvious ones, the Redskins, that I think would investigate it. To me, the really interesting teams, though, would be the ones that have got older quarterbacks that aren't going to be bad enough in the near future to draft the next one. And I'm talking about teams like Green Bay and New Orleans, the Chargers, the Patriots, the Saints. Those teams, if you're one of those teams and you're looking at it and you're saying, how am I ever going to be in position to draft a successor to Drew Brees or Phillip Rivers or Tom Brady when we're in the playoffs every year? Well, you have to get creative. And going and getting a Josh Rosen would be a creative way to attack it where in the short term, you've got a guy at $2 million per for the next 3 years. So a guy who's the acute backup for you. And so that's like the low-end potential for the trade. The high end is that you get your answer for the next 10 or 15 years. So it makes all the sense in the world to me that one of those teams would look at it. And, look at the Los Angeles Chargers, Rich. If you're them, bringing Josh Rosen home, is it worth flipping the 28th overall pick for him and saying, okay, we'll bring him in. He'll be a good depth piece here in the short term. And then long term, we may actually have a successor for Phillip Rivers. And this is a team, remember, that's having, and you're right there, having trouble selling itself in Los Angeles, right? Now, all of a sudden, maybe they've got to face the franchise as a local kid for the next 15 years.
That is a big piece of what if right there from Albert Breer. Last one for you, Albert. The Le'Veon Bell contract, I know you've been crunching the numbers. Did he come close to making the money back that he left on the table last year to make his point and win his freedom the way he did?
No. Look, I think that he's still going to be fine financially. The deal's not a horrible one, but he certainly left more money on the table. And there's no question about that on every single level. After 1 year, after 2 years, after 3 years, he should have. If it was really just about dollars and cents, he should have taken the Steelers' offer last year. And they made a mistake. They bet on themselves, and they thought they were going to be able to get more than Todd Gurley. You heard Le'Veon Bell come out and say he thinks he's more than a running back and he should be paid like a high-end wide receiver. That clearly didn't happen here. The market just wasn't there. And, if you want to go back and look at why, there's 100 reasons why. He sat out a year. That's part of the equation. He's got injury history. He's got suspension history. The position he plays obviously has been devalued to some degree over the last 20 years. It's just there's a myriad of reasons why this went down the way it went down. But I don't think there's any rational argument you can make. If it's just about the finances and not about playing for Mike Tomlin or playing in Pittsburgh versus playing in New York, I don't think there's any way you can make an argument that he came out on top in this one.
Albert, thanks for the call. As always, enjoy our chat. We'll chat next month or at the end of the month as we get closer to the draft.
You got it, Rich.
You bet. That's Albert Breer. Check out his work.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.